Hi, everyone. It's Britt Boles. Welcome to another episode of Blue Biographies. I'm really pleased today. We have John Walker. Hi, John.
G'day.
And we're going to be chatting with John about his adventures with foraging and growing indigo species. And we're going to hear from John about all of his adventures here. For anyone who's new to this series, Blue Biographies follows the journeys, stories, experiments of artisans, growers, farmers around the blue globe. So John, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are, what kind of indigo-bearing plants you work with.
I think of myself these days as a yarn maker, and I'd started with commercial dyes and pretty soon ended up with natural dyes. A couple of local people saying, "Oh, I use fresh picked mango leaves. It's my go-to yellow." And I do a 5-kilometre walk each morning. So I started picking and testing different leaves. And as the months go by, I learnt about indigo, but I never went there because it all sounded a bit big and scary and kind of involved. It's more involved than picking leaves. Put them in a pot, simmer for half an hour, add the yarn. Or with mango leaves, you can put the yarn in with the leaves and you've got yellow yarn within 3/4 of an hour. And I put off for a couple of years because I thought I just wasn't brave enough or knew enough before I was ready for indigo. I thought I needed a couple of base coats of knowledge before I crossed that bridge. And I should have gone earlier, but I just wasn't brave enough. But I went this year. I found records online of how botanists had spotted it. It started off saying it was naturalised in Queensland, where I live in North Queensland on the coast. The coast is a moderating sea breeze and it's different over the coastal ranges. The inland's a different world, but on the coast it never gets past mid-30s and humidity slows you down. I mean, down south it's 40 degrees and they play cricket in the middle of the sun. Up here at 35 degrees, you're on your knees gasping for breath with the humidity and the oppression of it all. But it's kind of nice most of the time, and I'm in the middle. Brisbane was a bit cold in winter and Cairns was a bit hot in summer, but Mackay in the middle was kind of nice. And we've got it good here. And it was only a few miles out of town was a record that indigo sophriticosa was growing. And it was a real adventure tracking it down. The records from the 1960s and the 1980s had spotted it. So it reminded me of those people who track down sunken treasure ships and find their records in the Portugal Museum and had it translated. Well, it wasn't that dramatic, but when you turn up at a spot and there it is, right where they said it was 40 years ago, it's a real thrill. But I wasn't too sure it was, of course, because I had never seen it up close. And so that's when the testing, but I learnt the testing because of the leaves and what have you I've been picking. So I knew about prospecting and that. So it's a great adventure and you just keep going out of your way to find new adventures all the time.
That's excellent. So these records, were they just kind of in the public library or how did you come across them? What kind of?
I Googled it.
Just online. Okay.
Yeah, but you got to be really specific because I can't remember what the words were I put in the search because it took me another 3 months to find it a second time.
Okay.
You click on one thing and then you click on the next one from that and the rabbit hole goes down a long way and then you find it. But if you don't leave a trail of breadcrumbs, Brittany, you'll never get back there again.
Right. Yeah, the internet.
It took months to find it again.
It's a deep, dark web, really. But how wonderful that, like you said, that it was exactly where they had said it was. Did it look as if anyone else had been harvesting from it or kind of, cultivating that area? Or is it really just a wild, open field.
It was in a narrow strip along the edge of a remote country road,
Okay.
and very little traffic go there, but a lot of people walk there.
Ah.
So some weeks, and cyclists, it's on a hill, people would be going past it all the time. And for maybe 100 meters along the strip of the road, only where the blade was where it had made the road, one step further into the bush, and there was no sign of it. It was just natural bush. Because I had some worries if I was going to take seeds and grow it elsewhere, that maybe what if it turned into a nasty pest and spread to places?
Mm-hmm.
So on the hill where and a lot of water in the wet season would go down there, they would have more than a metre of rain at times.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only 500 or 600 metres down the hill, there's agricultural land, there's farmland. So I'd asked a local farmer whether or not they had weeds in the crop that had washed out of the bush on the hill. And I mean, they've been growing cane there for 100 years, but it's never spread more than that 50 or so metres. And it was only on one side of the road. It didn't even go 3 steps to the other side.
Interesting, yeah.
So my further research on the big island in Hawaii, they got to have working bees at the local school because to cut it back, it invades the playing field. So I think a lot of things have got to go right for a plant to become a pest. Right across the Pacific Islands, Vivian in New Caledonia has found it growing where the Catholic mission was 150 years ago. And it hasn't spread out of that original, and it hasn't been a mission there for many generations, but it's still growing in the confines of that garden. And it's like that on little villages and islands right across the tropical Pacific. And it's still there, but it hasn't taken off and taken over the island and choked out vegetation so much. Although potentially it can, but everything has potential, doesn't it? So.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, right. Just like with woad, that's a common concern for folks. And in some environments, it's just no problem. It's widely cultivated in the British Isles and in France, but here it's considered an invasive species where I live. So growing it is not encouraged. Like you said, it's more about the soil conditions, I think, have a lot to do with it. And plants are opportunistic, right? If there's a place for them, they're going to set their seeds down and create a band-aid over, any barren earth, right? So if there's other species that are cultivated and established there, then they're probably not going to take over, right? So it's interesting too to differentiate between, for anyone who isn't familiar, that there's multiple indigo-bearing species, and the one that you're looking at is the Sifruticosa, or correct? And yes. There is a native wild Australis, if I'm saying that correctly. Is that right?
No. Oh, there is, yes, but it grows further south, a couple of thousand kilometers.
Okay. Yeah. And so you don't have any of that growing in the same region?
No. Okay. Different. Once you get north of the tropics, it's a different world.
Yeah.
Although if you're higher, because there's altitude also replaces latitude. If you're on a tableland area that's maybe 600 or 800 meters above sea level, it might grow, because a friend just up the head of the valley is at 700 meters, and she can't even get Sifruticosa to germinate there, even in the warm weather, because all these things have got to be just right. So.
Right. And in your research and your studies and online treasure seeking, were you able to find out information about how it came to be there, or why was it cultivated? Was it brought over for a purpose, for indigo production, do you think, or was there another?
I don't think it was, because this part of Queensland wasn't settled until the 1860s.
Okay.
And by then, I mean, in the first settlement, that first generation is just chopping down trees and growing food to live. So it's not until and the chopping down trees, cedar and timber were the money earners. There wasn't cultivated land. That didn't really start till the 1880s or 90s. And by then, synthetic dyes were on the march and taken over. So I don't think it was ever a cash crop vision. But it would seem from the studies I've done that the missionaries took the seeds with them because it's a legume and it does really well where you clear and you get a garden going for the first time. And indigo fera was also used in India as a 3 or 4 month crop to resurrect soils and recharge them for the next crop as part of a rotation. And I think the missionaries bought it because as a legume, it's high protein leaf and you can feed milking goats.
Interesting.
And I think, I don't know for sure, but I suspect, and the seeds are so tiny, they're smaller than poppy seeds. A tiny little jar of them would have, I think it's something like 10,000 seeds to a couple of grams. So a few seeds go a long way, and you can have milking goats. And with milking goats, you can have some sort of semblance of the old life you left behind in the other world with milk in your tea and making cheese or feeding babies and things like that. I suspect it was the missionaries that bought it and not just for a dye material.
Okay. Yeah. So do you know, are there others in your region or in the area who are looking at the plant as, something to forage for its dye purposes?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of places nearby, well, within 200 kilometres, where it's also growing, but it's a little vague, the directions. It's in the bush, several hundred metres on the edge of the sand dunes. And with a place like that, you really would be like the pirate who turns up on the beach to redig the chest, but you've got to be in the exact spot, to find it. Because, as I said, it doesn't spread so much. But I've taken seeds from this and it's going. We've got it in about 10 or 12 host gardens around town now, you see, from this this is because of you, this wouldn't have happened otherwise. So the ripples from your pebble tossed in the pond have reached our place and now the ripples are spreading again. But that's what indigo does, isn't it?
Yeah, that is. Yeah. It's such a communal plant. And I love your recent stories. Maybe you can share with everyone. You shared with me just how exciting it is that other people in your neighborhood and in your area are excited about growing indigo and harvesting it and cultivating it. I'd love to hear more about, just what does that do for community for you? And kind of, is there a vision for the future? Is there anything exciting that people are working towards together as far as, creating local dyes together?
Well, it is early days. So when I got those first seeds, I had some challenges. That was only in March, which was the tail end of our summer. And I had got 6 or 8 seedlings going. And we got a garden around, my wife got a garden around and they had pulled all these seedlings out and tipped the mix out and stacked all the jars up in the corner because they thought they all looked a bit untidy and there was weeds growing in my pots. So I cried myself to sleep for a couple of nights there.
No.
And then got some more seeds and 4 of them sprouted. But by then it was May or June, which is our winter, and it took like 200 seeds to get 4 to sprout because I didn't know the growing conditions at the time. So we're only talking 6 months ago.
Sure. Yeah.
And then those 3 grew and they're growing well. And I was plucking them every time a little shoot came out. I'd pluck it and do a little test to learn more about it. And I revisited the strip on that rural road to harvest again and found out that the first time in 30 years the council had sent a slasher along there. But it just might have been the best thing that happened to it because there's tiny little shoots on all those dead-looking stems. And that's when I did a test a few months ago, and a few leaves in my garden made much better blues than the leaves from the wild that had a hard, tough,
Right.
hungry winter.
Yeah.
And it's just every time you do something, even if it doesn't work out, you're learning things, you see, and it just adds to the. So I guess that's why farming took over from hunter-gathering, because it's more reliable. You can go out and pick the apples or pick the tomatoes when they're ready and not have to. Anyway,
Right. Yeah.
I'm still a hunter-gatherer at heart, and I kind of like the idea. And then, anyway, hang on, jumping ahead. At the end, in the middle of September, something happened. The temperature, the soil, the humidity changed, and Shirley in the next door suburb that I work with, she was growing them because she's a gardener, and hundreds of them popped up. And we transplanted them when they get past the matchstick stage into little pots, and there was 30, 40, 50. And that was when I thought, let's get some other people on board. Maybe they have an interest in growing dye, but maybe they just got a spare space in their garden and want to help out. So you sort of sow a bit of a dream to them of what might happen, and 10 plants fit in an area maybe the size of a desk, a small single bed mattress. You could put 10 or 12 of these plants.
Okay. Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
anyone's got a little patch like that. You don't have to plough up a half acre in the back paddock. You just have a little patch. So there's a whole batch, and they water them and look after them and send photos, sort of like the adopted kids and the new family, and you send photos back of their first. They're now at about knee high, and they're growing at more than an inch a day.
Oh, yeah, that's fast.
And I learned through your network that the best time to harvest these is after the pink flowers come out, the next week or so. See, some indigo farers, you pick them before they flower. That it's just learning what your plant will do in your garden and your everything.
Yeah.
And you just got to play with it and test it. And the thing is, if it doesn't work, it just costs you a week's growth. I mean, next week you print some more.
Wow, that's fantastic. So it's really quite fast growing.
Once everything's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So the temperatures now, and it was the overnight lows got past 22 Celsius. So what's that? 40, 80 odd degrees.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But they do like water. But because they're legumes, you don't have to be having the big compost thing and rich soil, which is why it was used historically on new soil when the land was first cleared, and it has a huge root system. So once it gets established, I can see why you'd want to maybe pull them out every year before the roots just grow them for 4 months, pull them out, and then use it to grow your vegetables and grow fresh ones. But where they're growing in the wild, they're up to 3 and 4 meters tall, but that's taken decades to get that size.
Right. Okay.
Normally they're only chest high.
Yeah.
And you can grow it as a little hedge and just clip it off like it was the front hedge of the garden. So I've got my plants right in my front garden hanging over on the footpath. So people are almost brushing it just to tease them. They don't know what they're brushing by, you see. But there's this gold that's happening right there. So,
maybe they'll accidentally pick a leaf, just as they're walking by. And
but there's a million other leaves are walking by as well.
Right.
And it doesn't look, it's not a great specimen. Oh, I really got to have one of those in my garden. Don't they look gorgeous?
It is. It's interesting how all the indigo species are kind of, they're nothing, very ordinary looking, sometimes very unnoticeable plants that hold that secret. So
I've done 2 workshops this year. The first one it's the first time I've done workshops.
Okay.
Introduction to rigid heddle weaving, because being a yarn maker and then dyeing it, and then I was making more dyed yarn than the family could knit. So I bought a small loom as a yarn destash tool.
Okay. Is this hanging behind you, one of your pieces here?
Yes. and in the last year, it's been almost entirely natural dyes. The cochineal is the only one I buy in now. So there's quite a bit of blue in there.
Wow, excellent.
And all the greens, again, are onion skins or whatever that are over dyed. Because I mean, and there's natural colours in here. This is all alpaca. And so there's tan and different fleeces that you blend together to, and you can do a lot with a couple of natural colours and 3 or 4 base primaries. It's over dyeing and just keep going for it.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And then you ask it, and this one I just laid more and more yarn in, so it's a winter weight. So you only get to wear this for 10 days of the year in my part of the world. Or you send
it over here. Yeah.
You send it to somebody who lives in a different climate, you know. So,
so those are local wool, local alpaca wools, and
this is alpaca, and I do get that down on the New South Wales Victorian border.
Excellent.
The wool and fur animals in the tropics don't seem to grow the length and density. You see those Eskimo kind of dogs around here, but they don't grow the extra coat that they would in Alaska because they don't need it. And
like a husky dog.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
And it's just a natural thing. If it's not cold enough, the body doesn't put the effort into making it. And it's like that with alpaca. And there are alpaca here, and people have them for petting places and it's keep the grass down in the side paddock, but not as a fleece machine. And there's not that many clever alpaca shearers around, and you could have a lovely fleece, but if you haven't got a good shearer, you lose value. So I get it from dedicated fleece growers and who are just as passionate about their product as I am about using it. And Australia Post has this system that is a flat rate parcel rate from any postcode to any postcode. It doesn't cost you any more to post it across the street or across the country, you see.
Okay, excellent. That's wonderful. And tell me more about, how did you begin into fiber arts? Was this something that you always had a passion for or learned in school or from family? What was the introduction to fiber arts to begin with?
Well, as one of my earliest memories, as maybe as 4 or 5 or 6 years old, my mum was a dressmaker, and she would make debutante frocks. There's not too much of that going on, but back in the 50s, people got lovely gowns made, and you would go to a dressmaker. Mum made the local ones. I grew up on a farm outside of a village in New Zealand, so I've only been here in Australia for 40 odd years, but I grew up in New Zealand. And I remember people would come around for a fitting, and they would put the dress on, and Mum would put a pin in the bottom for where the hem would fall to, and then they would go. And then when Mum had time, she'd have this stool, and you'd kneel on a stool with a book or something, and you'd have to put this dress on until you got the pin at the right place, and then she'd go right around it and pin the rest of because she had more time. So having it, you can't go in the room, you can't go in the lounge because there's satin spread out on the floor and there's cutting and patterns. It was just part of the background of my growing up. Yeah. And then in the 80s, my wife and her sister and I started an arts business from art school in Cairns. And we did pottery and batik and printmaking. And I worked with that, with the management thing. We set up galleries and dealerships in 6 or 8 places who did the retailing of it. And we were sent to United States, an agent in Florida and another lady in Cincinnati and South Australia and different places. And even the federal government would buy batik to give as corporate gifts when they would visit ministers in Indonesia, because they were still doing it with the janting tools and the different waxes. And in Indonesia in the 80s, a lot of those old ways were no longer used, and it was factory productions with stamps and things for the tourist trade.
Mm-hmm.
And it was pretty cool that we, Australian government, were giving our gifts of traditional batik making to ministers that handed it out at their village level. So there's a ripples, to do with ripples on pond. But somebody's got to mix the fibre reactive dyes and boil the things out afterwards to get the wax back, and doing all those chores and digging the clay to mix for pottery. I ended up being a production potter, making dinner sets and teapots. So my whole life has had this little flavour of artsy stuff in the background, and it doesn't really matter whether it was fibre or food or pottery. It's all raw ingredients and add heat or whatever.
Right, add heat. Yes, that's exactly it.
I mean, for my brain, for a guy's brain, I didn't have to rewire it too much. There's not a lot of difference between pottery and food, you see.
Right, yeah.
And it's handy if you don't have to rewire your brain. You just substitute a different starting ingredient. You get a different end product.
Yeah, just like the dye pot, right?
Yes, and everybody needs a hobby or a project, because at the end, nowadays, it's about mental health. And I mean, stuff happens, it's how you handle it that matters. Stuff always happens. And having hobbies or projects or passions in the background helps you handle things a whole lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. I also love the, as you mentioned, the connection to your local clay or your local vegetable garden or your local dye pot, right? Everything is also about that source connection and connecting to nature, getting outside, which is also improving your mental health, right?
But
I'd love to. Yeah, go ahead.
A lot of people don't realise that those connections is how it always was for thousands of years. Right. It really only changed in the last 60 or 70 years. So when people pick up a globally traded commodity and they think this is how it always was, and you think, well, no, not over the last 5,000 years. It's only been 50. Right. But it's like that. It's not always. Right. And there's a lot of things we can learn from the old ways. And the sort of things that we're doing with indigo and discovering, like that test I did to make this, where I went straight from fresh leaf to dyed yarn without having to worry about the extraction and the reduction and everything. In less than 8 hours, I'm going from picked fresh leaf to finished dyeing.
Yeah.
Sure that the ancients did that regularly, because I'm not that bright. I didn't invent it. It's just, we just think about it and say, what if?
Right.
Now, what if I did it and it didn't work? All it cost me was a little bit of time. It's not as if I had to send away on mail order to get ingredients in or anything. Right. It's like picking potatoes and you think, well, do you want to have a go at mashing? What's mashing? You know?
Right. Should we try eating it? Yeah.
And that's the sort of thing that was always done. This is why there's 100 versions of roast lamb, isn't it? What's the difference between Greek lamb and Australian lamb and English lamb? And it's just what you do with it.
Right. Yeah. Will you tell us a little bit more? I know you posted in the group your recent experiment, but also talk to me about the SIG vat, because I think a lot of people aren't familiar with it and or are tentative about learning about the SIG vat. And that is also something really ancient too, right? We've been trained to learn that, you know, urine is something that we flush down the toilet and it's waste. Yes. And so I think learning about how it has been used historically forever as an agent to wash and an agent for indigo. Will you tell us a little bit about the SIG vat and how you did your recent experiment?
Okay, so a SIG vat is stale urine, but it's not urine anymore. Something happens to it. When it first comes out, it's fresh urine and it's acidic. But if you leave it for a month or two, it changes and becomes alkali. And there's bacteria in it that do things. And it changes in the same way that sugar and water with yeast becomes alcohol.
Right.
And you're drinking alcohol. You're no longer drinking a sugar yeast because it's been transformed. And this is what SIG is. And the dyes, everybody wanted stale urine in the ancient times because that was a chemical workhorse of the ancient world. The tanners out the edge of town, you could even it's another name for it is ammonium nitrate. And ammonium nitrate, you made urine every day. And if you save the morning one, which is stronger, if you boil it down, although in the bigger cities, you'd be up, the council and the neighbours would be carrying on like nobody's business. But in some little village, all that sort of stuff happened in the industrial area, which was the downwind side, the tanners. But if you boil down aged urine until it's white crystals, that's ammonium nitrate. And then you can mix that with charcoal and sulfur, and it's called gunpowder. And people had a use for gunpowder. And it's just one of the many things you did that was from hand, from what was at hand. Nowadays with ammonium nitrate, they mine it or make it chemically, and you can add diesel to it. And there's a huge coal mining area near our town. We have one of the world's largest coal export terminals just around the corner here.
Interesting.
And they blast coal loose by using ammonium nitrate and diesel as the explosive agent.
Okay.
But it's the same chemicals nearly as what was used in ancient times and people would save it. A guy would come around once a week with drums and collect down the street, and he would resell it to you. But in recent decades, we're thinking when there's 1 million people living on top of each other, it all gets a little bit smelly and grubby. This isn't 50 families with 1,000 acres of farmland around them. You've got 1 million people in the city, and the world changed and it became a waste product. And we now spend billions of dollars to dilute it and dump it.
Yeah, interesting.
But the thing with using SIG, it provides the alkali for protein fiber. It's at pH of 9, which is exactly where you want. It has the bacteria in it that over time build up, and the nutrients in the SIG feed the bacteria, and then the bacteria take the oxygen out. So it's your reducing agent. So it all happens at once. When you take the yarn out and you're finished with the vat, you can use the old SIG vat, add a cup to a bucket of sprinkler water and put it back in your garden as irrigation, and you're adding nitrates back to the soil. And it's this cycle that's always worked.
There is no waste anymore when you use it that way, right?
Exactly. And even the leaves you pulled out, I fermented in the bucket in the garden and pull the leaves out and just put it as mulch straight back into the garden.
Right.
But it does happen fast in the tropics. I said from past 8 in the morning till 3:30 in the afternoon, it was ready. And it took me a while to learn that because I was reading from people, and you leave it 3 days or 4 days. And yes, when I'm washing fleece, I put it out in the yard on the old trampoline that's not safe for kids to jump on anymore. And I don't spin it out in the washing machine. I'm pulling it out and just in one of those laundry bags and squeeze it in the laundry bag and then spread it on the trampoline. And it's dry in 2 to 3 hours.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
By lunchtime. You can do another batch after lunch.
Yeah.
And I read stories of people in New York State where they're drying it and it takes 3 days to dry because the intensity of the sun and it's just not the same. So, so the solution is move a couple of 1,000 miles closer to the equator, I guess. But there's advantages and disadvantages for everything, though. But you just got to work with what you've got and how it works. And for us, you can do it in 7 or 8 hours, as I found out on Friday.
Okay.
But I put this fresh skein. I spun the yarn on Thursday, and on Friday morning, I put it in the bucket with 1 kilo of fresh leaves, filled it up with SIG. This is I buy my milk bottles now in plastic 3 litres because I want to use them. The people buy jams and fruit and pickles and things because they want the jar.
Right.
And so you buy the right container. And so this is months now, you save it up. It's just the habits you develop can change your future. So
Yeah.
you can tell if one spring's a leak. I know they're only single-use plastic, but you walk around that side of the veranda and you can tell if something was leaking straight off and you can fix it.
Yeah, brilliant. So you're able to go from your spun fleece and to blue in a matter of
7 hours.
7 hours. That's incredible.
And the only thing I walked away from that garden with was this.
Right.
The leaves go straight back in.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the urine ends up back in the garden.
Right.
What did it cost?
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. I love that. Yeah, and you're right. This is something that people have been doing forever. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's just that within the synthetic dyes were so, and when you use them, you think that is so cool, and I got this gorgeous color just like that.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
You can see how it took, because other ones, I've just harvested my tannins for the year because the bark falls off in November, and I save it and you simmer it and you put it in 20-litre drums. So you don't see that work. We want some,
sure.
I use tannin in with the cochineal, but you just get a shot of tannin, but that tannin is in the season for it and you put it aside. And right. I guess with yarn, you would be spinning it in the winter and you're shearing it in the spring. To have 100 skeins of yarn, it's a year's work.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because at different times you do different parts of it, and there's no spinning this week, we're ploughing or something. It's just part of that cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And it does something good for the soul when you plug into natural cycles again.
It really does. Yeah. Wow, that's very inspiring. I've actually not yet. I haven't crossed the bridge to make a SIGBAT, but it's on my list.
So you were like that I was with indigo.
Yeah, I was having those feelings. I remember a lot of folks asking the question, oh, does the yarn smell afterwards? And I'm looking at you wearing it around your neck, and I highly doubt that you would want to wear it around your neck if it did smell bad, right? I'm sure people ask you about that.
Yeah. So you wash it. I mean, yeah. If I just pulled it out of the SIGBAT and wrapped around my neck, I'd want to run away from me. But you wash it, and the biggest thing is just leaving it on the clothesline in the sun and all this. And you hear, oh, you shouldn't do it in the sun. You got to do it flat in the shade. And I think, hang on, alpacas walk around in the sun all day. They don't seem to have a problem with their coat.
Yeah.
And it rains on it, and their body heat, and it's cold, and I think what hurts these sort of fibers is sudden changes.
Mm-hmm.
And an automatic washing machine, for example, has just done a hot wash and it's spinning out and it sprays cold water on. See, modern washing machines were made for polyesters and modern fabrics.
Right.
So you just got to have a bit of a think sometimes. Oh, but it's not convenient to have those sort of things. Well, that's the price you pay, I guess, to plug into different systems. So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think a lot of people have complaints about natural dyes with fading. And I would say that one of the biggest things is the washing machine and the dryer. It's that it's very aggressive in there, it's very hard on clothing. And so.
But there's also the living arrangements don't have a backyard with a clothesline anymore. Yeah. When you live on the 15th floor, that's the only option you have.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is wonderful. I'm so inspired by this. And I would ask just a few more questions of you if you still have time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is Sunday morning for me.
Okay, great. Excellent. Well, yeah, I'd love to know about your plans with cultivating, in the different kind of community gardens. Are there other local yarn or weavers or other fiber artists who you think might utilize some of the indigo in other projects as well?
There is. So I touched on this when I said I just started doing my first workshops only a couple of months
Yeah.
ago, Introduction to Weaving. And there were 8 people at that workshop at the Youngula Ancient Arts and Craft Fair.
Okay.
And they had things like blacksmithing and they had some weavers down. So even though it's not, weaving's ancient, but the looms we use is an Ashford loom and there's nylon thingies in the comb and they probably use computer systems to run the milling machinery. And so it's not some village tradie working with handmade tools that is making these looms. So, but the concept and the connections and the threads are still there. And the people love the idea. And one of the things we do, you don't have your phone with you unless you're emergency service. So you're away from technology. Okay. So you've got 2 or 3 or 4 hours all day just to focus on that thing. And it's a good thing too. And you're hanging out with kindred souls who would want to do that sort of stuff. And they all had a lovely time. They said, let's do it again. And I'm thinking, it was my first workshop and I had never worked with 4 or 6 or 8 people before. So while we were still hot to trot, I booked a room the next month and did another workshop with introduction to rainbow dyeing with commercial dyes, making sure that there was this big mango tree 100 metres down the road with leaves ready to go on it. And so with that, the same people, we went and made a mango dye and I put those skeins aside for the next one to make a range of, oh, this is really good. And I was talking yesterday to 2 of those members. I've ordered more yarn and I dyed it with the mango leaves and I wove it on my loom, a little test strip, and I made a little handbag out of it. So I'm thinking, like a fisherman, I got that hook now and it seems to be working with a few of them. She's going away on holidays, but she would like a dozen plants to put into her garden when she gets back in a few weeks. And so it's just tiny ripples going out.
Yeah.
But the thinking is that come the end of February, which is when our indigo will be setting seeds and ready for harvest, we might have another workshop day because we haven't done it like this before. This is kind of new for all of us. Yeah. We're not plugging into an existing system. We're inventing our own little pond with our own little pebbles to toss into it. But maybe we could have it set up so there was something that was already picked yesterday. And it's been in a drum ready for 10 or 11 o'clock this morning overnight and keep it in the shade rather than the sun because we're learning little things along the way. And maybe we hire a minibus for 8 or 10 of us and we spend the day driving around these different places and end up with a sig vat at the last one with yarn all ready to go. It's kind of like those progressive dinners that used to have where you have entrees at Brittany's place and drinkies at somewhere else, and do it like that with indigo, because the other ones are like 4-day workshops where it's work. You've got to turn up and we pick it now and we do this and this and you haven't got time for lunch. We've got to get this done or we'll run out of time. Let's just cruise around. These are my latest little thoughts, you see, because I remember my time as all those years as a chef. And when you have new apprentices, you always put them on desserts for that first week, you see. You don't have them chopping 5-kilo boxes of mushrooms all day and then peel the onions when you finish that. There's none of that tough love. You have the first week to get them sweet, put them on dessert, make them, creme patissiere for filling eclairs and you've got to get them in gently and then you put them on potato and onion peeling, you see.
Right. Yes. Brilliant. Yeah. And it's such I find we've talked about this before about it being a communal plant, really to do a big batch, to do a substantial amount to, especially if you're going to harvest to extract it to use later, it's quite a bit of work, right? So having a group of people in on it, including including others in the community into the process, of course, makes it more fun, more enjoyable for you and them. And then, like you said, those little ripples where people take home a little start, put it in their garden plot, see what it does there. And then that's, I think that's how it's happened for all of us probably in the group, is somebody shares a plant with us and it has that wonderful effect of changing our lives sometimes.
Yes, if you let it, and if you're looking for a change.
Right. Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, I'm very excited and I'm really happy that you keep us posted in the group about all your projects, all your experiments, and all the other people who are growing indigo with you in your community. I think that's just such a beautiful thing to connect over.
Well, a lot of them aren't growing it to make indigo to dye things. They're doing it because John asked them to. So it's a process, and it's only a small patch of the garden, you see. And this first time between here and, say, Easter next year, it's learning for all of us what will and won't work, and we'll have more seed and then in the winter, although these plants live through the winter because we don't have frosts here.
Right.
Not right on the coast. They do 30 miles away, but not right here with the sea breeze. So next year, so it's an ongoing thing, but we'll have a bigger team that with their own idea. And when your network starts networking with other networks, and it's just people reaching out. I mean, there are so many artists around this town, and see, my town is 120,000 people, so it's not such a small village. But they work in their own little studios and they have some of them are global businesses that are sending mail order stuff to all around with weaving and fibre and colour and things. And people don't realise what's going on in that house 2 doors down the road. And some of them have weavers, as 2 or 3 families would rely on it for mortgage and groceries and school fees and things. And it's with projects like this, they might, because I met them, they buy some of my yarn and use that as a bit of a feature with some hand spun in with their mill spun stuff that they buy from. There's a big factory near where you live that make looms. I think it's around Oregon somewhere. And those looms are here and they're like $60,000 or $90,000 each and need computers and compressor motors to run them. And so the ripples are going back and forwards and always have. But having a thing like this indigo, she's growing indigo for me. Right. Yeah. And she has this huge business, but she probably won't dye her silk with it because it's not as controlled as synthetics, but she's part of that group and ideas and that will go back and forth through it, and makes us all better workers. Yeah. You never know. I think a lot about that. The person that inspired me to grow indigo was growing vegetables, and they never put a second thought to, this is my focus over here. This is how I'm making money. This is the wheel that turns my engine, and indigo kind of snuck into their farm and then it took over. And so now it's a huge don't do farm. Vegetables so much now? Oh, they definitely still do, but took over in their heart, meaning, it became their passion project, and that rippled onto me, and now it's my passion project. And so it's, you just never know, like you said. And just to introduce it into, especially the indigofera species, into any grower's life. It's just a plant that provides so much nutrients and nitrogen as a cover crop, as a seasonal rotation. It just makes sense, doesn't it? It does. Oh, and this one isn't my Indigofera safraticosa. Margaret grew this, who's part of our little group, and this was her first go. She got some seeds from down south for Japanese indigo. The Persicaria. Okay, beautiful. And she had planted that out in August, and but she was working inland and was only home on the weekends. And it fit, some of these things fit in, and it grew so fast. And she's taking a little patch that's a metre or so by less than 3, like 4 foot by 10 foot, and we're taking 2 kilos a week out of it.
Wow. Yeah.
It needs a lot of food. You're putting the sea salt spray on it, and it was a rich compost bed to start with. But if you keep the food and water up to it, but we don't know how it will go through the tropical heat because it's so dense, and will it start getting mold and mildew happening in the humidity underneath. You don't realise just how humid it is until you have days and nights where it never goes under the mid-90s.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, here it's quite humid, but we stay in the 80s, so.
Oh, when we lived in Cairns, I used to have stuff that grew on my arm, and it was one of the reasons we left. So long enough with humidity can cause issues, you see. But until you give it a go, you don't know how it's going to work, do you?
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's an incredible fast grower too.
The Japanese one grows, yes, that one grows faster. It's a lot bulkier and fleshier and heavier than my indigo fera.
Right.
But I'm thinking the colour's the same. I mean, they got the same chemicals in them, haven't they, that make indigo?
The same precursor chemical, right? The indican. Yeah, it is definitely a lot like heavier as far as mass to work with, right? You really have to have a big container, and the stems are really heavy, right? They're quite thick.
Yes. And after I dyed the protein yarn, I dyed this T-shirt. So
yeah, nice.
the cotton comes out quite a bit, and it's because it was only a little bucket, it came out a little patchy. So
I like that.
Yeah. I look a little bit feral with the T-shirt on, but I love it. It comes out a lot less on the cotton, so less denser colours.
Yeah.
I did that to make sure that I hadn't destroyed by heat in the garden. Someone had asked, that maybe it was a one-shot wonder for one skein, but no, it's still working.
Still working, yeah.
Yeah.
And so will you add more fresh leaves to it, do you think? Or will you add powdered indigo?
Well, there's enough there for another 5 or 6 skeins, but as it fizzles out, I will add more paste to it. And of course, the reason it stops dying is not generally because it's run out of indigo. It's because, as you've told us, the balance isn't right. The pH has changed, or the reduction isn't reducing anymore. So that's why all your skeins are pre-soaked in SIG and squeezed out. So each time you put a skein in, it's getting a little bit of new SIG in with it, which is adding new bacteria.
That's smart, yeah.
Yeah. I'll send you a brochure about it, Britt.
I would love that. Yes, please.
And I found that online that somebody had done this 20 years ago. And sometimes just reading a couple of paragraphs can change I get it,
Yeah.
Why would I dilute it and try and kill it every time I put a skein in, you see? What can I do that every time I add a skein gives it a leg up to work better?
Wow. This is blowing my mind right now. Now I'm thinking about all the other vats too, and how you could be adding reducers into the soap water there too. Yeah, very interesting. And will you talk a little bit about, I know you just started working with the henna vat as well, right? You have some local henna leaves.
Well, I didn't know that. I had dyed with henna because Kay, a friend of ours who died a couple of years ago, was a keen gardener. And my daughter is living in her house now. And it all went to rack and ruin when she wasn't. But in the couple of years before she had died, she'd given plants away. And I found out one of the little plants she'd given away was to Kay, and it was a henna tree. And I had bought some henna at the Indian grocery store because I'd heard it does colour. And when I had cooked it up and made the dye and dyed the yarn, it comes out this gingery tan colour. And I got alpaca that comes in that colour naturally.
Sure. Yeah.
That's a lot of work to get what I've already got. So I didn't proceed with it. But Kay has it growing near her letterbox and across the driveway, and she's got to keep cutting it back because it grows so fast.
Okay.
And it's really easy to harvest. You just park in the driveway and you're stripping leaves off straight into a bucket. Half a plastic bucket is maybe half a kilo of leaves, and that's enough for a batch. And then I read that you can do henna as a reducer because you don't have the mordant in there. And so that gingery tan colour of the dye doesn't turn it into gingery tan crossed with. This is a bit that takes us country boys a while to get our head around, you know. I put this skein of wool in this gingery tan dye and it comes out gingery tan, and I put it into that one and it doesn't come out anything.
Right.
And that's where the mordants come in. So it's all part of that journey. So then I found out I can add it, and I did that a couple of months ago. And because in the winter I can do that. The sig vats don't work in the winter so well. They need it warm. So that's like a summertime fun thing for a few months over summer. So you need a plan B natural, and that's when the henna worked for that.
So when you take the leaves, would you process them the same way as if you're going to make a dye pot with the leaves?
Exactly. I just strip the leaves off. You can just drag your fingers down the stem, and they've got a handful of leaves, and the stem's bare behind it. So then you just cut the bare stems off after you've harvested the leaves. So then all the fresh leaves go into a pot, covered with water, simmer for an hour, and leave overnight.
And then I just becomes your dye liquid.
Clean it tomorrow, and the leaves go back in the garden, and there's the dye. And if I was to make when I made the vat, just a small one, I do a lot of these sort of 10 or 12 litre ones. What's that, like 2 or 3 gallon vats?
Yeah.
A lot of people do their tests with just a few meters of yarn in a little jam jar. But I'm asking myself, what if it works? I think, if it works, I want a whole skein to do something. What do I do with 2 meters of yarn? So, and if it doesn't work, I don't lose the yarn. I can just overdye it with something else.
Sure. Yeah.
And I have no requirement, as you can see here, I have no requirement for 2 skeins to be the same of anything.
Right.
If you wanted 10 skeins the same to knit a jumper, you can go to the department store. They do that really well.
Right. Yeah.
And so I don't mind that they're all different. And anyhow, with the henna, if I was making a vat, that's right.
Yeah.
I put my paste in, and I'd use some of the lime water with it, maybe, that I've saved 3 or 4 litres with the paste, put them together, add the 4 litres of henna, mix it all together, and then just tweak the pH, and then just leave it till tomorrow. And then magic-y sort of happens while you're sleeping.
Right.
So many people think, I want a 15-minute, a 5-minute dip, and they go, no, go mow the yard or cook dinner or something, and come back this afternoon or in the morning, or because when you're working with protein fibre, it's a lesser pH for a longer time seems to work. And it takes away this urgency of watching. And when you're dealing with things that 5 minutes here and 4 minutes there and 52 degrees is too much and you really should be at 50, and there's a lot of pressure on your day. And I've got that at the office. I don't want to layer it up when I get home, you see. So I like the idea of having 3 or 4 things going, and you just cruise from it. You go and spin some yarn for an hour, and then you go and check it, how dry it is on the trampoline, and then you see if that pot simmering on the barbecue is ready to turn off yet. And then you chat to somebody. And isn't this how it used to be? The only time it got serious was when you had to pick up a spear and chase somebody, or a sort of crafty project stuff, it just fits into life so much better.
Yeah, there's not a big rush of cortisol all the time with the stress hormones.
But
Yeah.
there are things growing around my town, trees from colonial times, where they planted all sorts of things, hoping that something could work. I mean, there was coffee plantations here in the 1870s and tea plantations. They even have kapok trees that they brought from India that used to be used for stuffing mattresses before inner springs were invented.
Interesting.
And these trees are still growing. And a lot of trees along the creek banks, because the public servants in colonial Queensland were recruited out of the public service in India. And so you might go from assistant postmaster in some town to head postmaster in a little emerging township in Queensland. So a lot of those ideas, mangoes came to Queensland, and then they developed their own varieties from it. But I think mango chutney is a traditional thing, but it's not really mangoes. It used to be English apple chutney. And when the colonials came here, they used mangoes instead of apples to make the chutney. And, oh no, this is traditional. It's how it's always was. And you think, maybe just for a few generations, but not forever.
Yeah.
And so there's other things around it. And people have forgotten why it was brought here. It's just a big tree. They realised that was perhaps the seeds from that could have sparked a new industry, you see, but they tried so many things in the early days and they just moved on. And those trees are still there and they could have a new use, which is why I don't even know what they are. I'm just picking leaves and giving it a go, and some of them work. A lot of those barks I got, because when you're collecting bark for dye, it's like collecting bark off power poles. You know, there's no leaf. The leaf is 30 meters in the air and you can't see which, and the trees are all growing together. You don't know which leaf is which tree or anything. So the bark, and then they all come out dull, duller and blue. And so you move on from bark for color, and then you find out you can do that same thing, but you want the tannins. It's not for color.
Right.
So suddenly you're back at that tree harvesting bark with it. You're seeing it with new eyes.
Yeah.
And I was just looking for color. So this is part of that journey and the adventure. And so it's fun to take a little bag in your pocket when you go for a walk every morning, just see what's going.
Right. Have you used old mango fruits for your reducing agent yet?
No, I haven't, because I use those, because I'm a fermenter from way back. I use those to make my own vinegar.
Ah, okay. Okay. Yeah.
I make about 3 or 4 20-litre drums of vinegar every year, and I'm pretty good at it. Because from a chef, you mostly use it to make things like Worcestershire sauce and use it to make mango chutney, for example, vinegar-based chutneys and sweet chili sauces and all that sort of thing. And so I'm harvesting the fructose from the mangoes to ferment to make alcohol, and then got my own bacteria that I put in it, because to make vinegar, you have to ferment sugars to make alcohol first, like apple cider becomes apple cider vinegar because the bacteria eat the alcohol and give off acetic acid.
Right.
But where I used it exclusively for cooking, now I'm also using it as a pH modifier. I use that same vinegar in with cochineal, for example.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, cochineal with vinegar with tannins is a mordant for cochineal. And so I'm using, it's just new eyes looking at the old thing. But the ancients knew that all the time. They used apples to make apple juice and cider from it, and use that to vinegar, or barley for malt for vinegar. And the ancients knew all this, and now we're trying to learn, is it in aisle 16 or aisle 17 is our big problem of the day.
Yeah. I love that you drew the comparison between, every every real craft form, art form is adding heat. And then I think of a lot of it is, like you said, is having patience to let things ferment and walk away from things.
Yes.
A lot of it isn't complicated process, and much of it is just a few ingredients, one or two, maybe three, right? But it's the patience to let it walk away and let it ferment, come back and witness the chemical transformation. Now it's something different.
And there's a lot of mango trees around my town, and they fall on the ground and they drop and they fall on the road and they ferment, and people drive over them, drive over fermenting mangoes on the ground to go to the supermarket to pay $2 each to buy a mango that was trucked in from hundreds of miles away.
That's ironic, huh? Yeah.
Yes. But one of the little secret things I'm doing, and I'm glad I'm telling you and no one's ever going to hear this, is that now I've got 8 or 10 gardens with a dozen or so plants in each one, and and I just potted up another 50 yesterday that'll be ready for transplanting in a fortnight's time.
Excellent.
I've been doing a little bit of guerrilla gardening activity, you see, around.
Oh, yeah.
A bit of that. It's not like, I don't know how long you could get away with it, but I mean, if you put half a dozen plants in half a dozen locations, maybe the council won't chop them all out.
Right. Yeah. And
I can go back to being a hunter-gatherer again with my walks.
I love that.
Just take the bag and come home with a kilo of leaf and put it in the fermenter and go off to work for the day. So,
yeah.
Yes, but if you're not going to be home for 6 or 8 hours, don't put it in the sun. Leave it in the shady side of the house.
Yes. Yeah, this is something I don't have experience with, so I'm glad to have folks who live in other climates really talk about that difference, because I know it's completely different from what I experience. I can go 6 days sometimes with a ferment, and that would be the death of something over where you live. Right?
So what would be your daytime temperatures when you're talking 5 or 6 days for something to happen?
Yeah, in the summer is when I'm doing mine, because here, we have a very a cold, well, in comparison, we have a colder winter, and I'm dealing with an annual, not a perennial. So I'm growing the Persicaria tinctoria, and I would be trying to really look at the forecast and look for a period of sun, no clouds, no rain, because that really does slow it. It can almost stall it. I've done it where it was overcast and in the 60s Fahrenheit, and it just didn't do anything. The water just sat there and it got murky, but it didn't, I wasn't able to actually get any indoxal extracted from the leaves. So 60 degrees Fahrenheit, what is that?
15.
About 15. Yeah, so that would be pretty cold.
Oh. We wear our winter woolies for going walks on those warm mornings in winter.
So I aim for the days where it's more like high 70s to 80s. And then if I'm lucky, I can put it under a greenhouse or a hoop house. And the plastic in there, the kind of greenhouse environment helps trap the heat. And I usually use a cover. So I'm covering it, I'm putting it in the sun, or I'm putting it in the greenhouse to kind of speed things up for me. And so typically on a hot day in the high heat of summer, I can get an extraction between 3 to 5 days. That's my average.
That's like making hay, isn't it? And you're dreading rain on the morning of the 3rd day because it'll all be wasted.
Yeah, you don't know what's going to happen. We're always at the mercy of the weather and the seasons, right? A lot of it is really letting go, like you said. And what's my loss? If I don't try, I'll never know.
Well, that 7-hour one with this, I'd put that 9-litre bucket inside a bigger tub with a lid on it in the front garden in the sun. Now, the hottest it got that day was 32 degrees. But when I got home, the shade had moved over that maybe a half hour earlier, and it was 39 degrees inside that tub. So I'm making a little greenhouse for it. And so
Yeah.
I'm guessing it was probably 41, which is 40, what's that, 110 degrees, you see?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I had to create that greenhouse effect. It wouldn't have worked in the courtyard in the shade in 7 hours.
Right. Mm-hmm.
If I was a half hour later coming home, that would have just been grey mud that had died.
Right.
And so it's really, it's like tiger moth flying by the seat of your pants, isn't it?
Yes.
Make it up as you go along and see what the next hour brings, because you're right on the edge when you're running at those sort of temperatures for any length of time.
Right. Yeah, that's why the most common question people ask in the group is my extraction done? And we can't tell you because we aren't there, and it's changing every minute, right? Every hour, things are changing for you. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's the fun. That's the part that you just need some adventure, and people aren't used to having adventures, getting the heart rate up, and and they put a comment on, and they really need an answer in the next minute or two because 5 minutes is too long. And I think, well, go put the kettle on, make a pot of tea, and then have a look.
Yeah, and do lots of trials. Just do a lot, and that's I like to say, your library of experience. You're building your library. You need a lot of short stories. You need some long stories. You need some sad. You need some tragedy. You need to have the bad batch that goes bad, and you need to learn from it. And you need to have the hero tale where it all goes really well. We need the variety.
If you've never smelt the bad smell where it's gone too far, how will you recognize it when it nearly happens?
Exactly. Yep. Yes. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, this has been a pleasure and an inspiration. Thank you so much, John. It's really been wonderful to get to know you through the group and to see how your ripple is rippling out into your community and into other little nooks and crannies. And please keep us posted on what happens. I feel like it's going to be a really abundant year, it sounds like, with all those plants. And if anyone is in your region, can they contact you about getting an indigo plant perhaps, or getting a workshop?
Yes, they could always just track me down on Facebook.
Yeah.
And send a message. I have sent seeds off to other people around Queensland, but when I've sent them south, they haven't worked. There's some indigo people down on the Sunshine Coast, which is 900 kilometres south, and they've struggled to get it going. I think it's because tropical plants really are for the tropic. Now, I know there are gardeners who pride themselves on growing the banana that nobody within 1,000 miles has been able to do.
Sure.
But that's not how it works with indigo so well. To do well, it has to be really comfortable. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And if it struggles to get going, it'll probably never do the indigo work you would hope. There would be a variety that'll do that job for you, maybe just not the Saffreticosa one.
Right. Do you think that it's more that area lends itself to the Persicaria?
Yes. Mm-hmm. But this is my first experience with Persicaria, so. And we don't know how it'll go through the summer, but it's worked well from September, because when I say summer, you're thinking June, July, aren't you?
Right.
So,
opposite there. Yeah. Well, wonderful. Yeah, I will definitely keep one of my favorite things about the group and meeting people is trying to connect people with other people that I see. So my flag always goes up whenever I have a little inventory. My brain is really good at keeping track of people for some reason. When it comes to indigo, I have a large file folder. And so I love to see, somebody pops up from Australia. Oh, have you met John yet? Or have you met this little group of people? You guys should get in touch. And I love seeing those connections happen on the group. That's actually my favorite part of being a part of this group, is that I see people getting together with one another, and then they're off. They're off to the indigo races. So
and I'm looking for Saffreticosa, and that's where I met on your group with Anna in Dutch Caribbean. She grows the same indigo as me, and the latitude's nearly the same, and it's a maritime environment. And there's people in southern Brazil too at 20 and 21 degrees south, and I'm at 21 degrees south, so it's exactly the same latitude as me. Here in New Caledonia, where Vivian is, she's at about 22 degrees south, so it's a bit further south than what my part of Queensland is, but we're growing. So we're having this little connection by coastal environment.
Latitude, yeah.
Stephanie, I was just chatting to yesterday, she's in Mauritius, and it's sort of that same 21, 22 degrees south latitude, and with Saphrodicosis. So I'm making all these connections on a latitude thing with the same plant that seems to be doing well. It'll grow without you.
Right. Brilliant. Oh, I love that. Maybe we should have a little chart or something that's based off of latitude, and you could find people based off of that. That would be really neat, actually.
Yeah.
Well, excellent. Thanks again, John. This has been a pleasure to hear about your journey with indigo. And like I said, I'm very inspired myself. I know others will be when they listen to this episode. And if they have questions, I know you're active here in the group. They can tag you. And if you're local to, again, you're in the Queensland, or you're outside of?
Yes.
Yeah, you're right in Queensland.
Because Queensland's pretty big. It's 3,000 kilometres from top to bottom.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, thank you. And I look forward to staying in touch. It's always really nice, actually, for us in the Northern Hemisphere to see what people are doing in the Southern Hemisphere while our gardens are asleep. You know, we're dreaming our indigo dreams for next year and watching what you're up to.
We're giving you hope that winter will finish.
Yes, it does. It is. It's really nice. Yeah. Well, thank you again, John. We'll take care, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Good chatting with you.